Hey everybody, welcome to React, the definitive beginner's guide to this exciting modern JavaScript framework, React.js. I am Jeremy and I'm here with Rami. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
All right, we're going to jump pretty quickly into the content here. We've got a lot of really good stuff. So why don't we start with some introductions? What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Rami Sayar. I'm a technical evangelist based out of Montreal, Canada. I know that's pretty far from where we're at right now. I actually love to build for the web with JavaScript, Node.js, PHP, Python, all the open source web technologies. And I develop for Microsoft Edge specifically and all the other modern browsers. I love to help startups and developers all over the world just build awesome stuff. And if you want to read some of the stuff that I'm writing, you can check them out at the blog, msdn.com/b/CanadianDevs, or at ramisayer.com.
The second one's a little bit easier to remember.
Yeah. Well, I actually don't blog as often there as I do on the MSDN blog, but yeah, it is. You can actually get a link to everything else from my website as well.
There you go.
Yeah.
Great. And I'm Jeremy Foster. I like to say that I like to make and teach and learn, explore, lead, and love, all the good things in life. Just like Rami, I'm a developer evangelist here at Microsoft, and you can find me and all of my social contacts at codefoster.com. Ping each of us anytime you want on Twitter. That's a really good kind of public forum, great way to get a hold of us and ask a question about this content or kind of anything else. It's what for you, like web stack related? Is that?
Yeah, web stack, whether it's backend, front end. If it's anything to do with JavaScript, I'm pretty much ready to help.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, myself too. I like the web stack. I do a lot with IoT these days. That's really exciting. So if you're doing anything in those spaces, go ahead and follow us and ping us. So let's cover the agenda. Why don't you walk us through what we're going to walk through today?
Yeah, so this is the first module. We're just going to do a quick welcome to React. In our second module, we'll dive into components, which is some of the main pieces of the React library. In the third module, we'll talk about how to handle data and state with React, and React does things a little bit differently from other frameworks, so it's going to be really interesting when we dive into that module. The fourth module is about React and some of the other add-ons that you might want to use with React, like the routing libraries, and that's really handy if you're building a single-page application that has multiple pages. So we'll show you how to set that up with your components. In Module 5, we'll do a quick overview of ECMAScript 2015 and how you can use classes and modules, these new features in ES 2015 with React. We'll also cover Webpack that you'll see us be using throughout the different modules to actually build our application. And we'll cover some other dev tools that we think are really handy if you're developing any type of React application. And then finally, we're going to show you how to connect to the bot framework, which is this really awesome way for you to build bots and connect the bots, the chat and the conversation is happening in the bot framework with our React single-page application.
Okay. So now there's a few things in there, like the Webpack, that the concept of a bot that we're just going to kind of gloss over for now, and we'll get to that when we get into those modules. So maybe just kind of push the believe button and and hang with us here. So let's go ahead and jump right into Module 1, just an introduction to React and a definition of what it is.
Right. So what is React? So React, if you think about it, is a view library. It's a library that helps you build user interfaces, so UIs, for the web. And if you think about it, why has React become so popular? It's because it takes a new look at how to build UIs for the web. So previously, you might have a DOM, and you might put all your data in the DOM, and it was being displayed by the browser. Well, with React, you actually change a lot of what you do there. You sort of change how you develop the UI instead. So you actually put things into components, and then React will update the DOM with the data that you have in your components. So it'll actually change what you see in the browser, and it'll handle all that for you. There's like even a virtual DOM that sort of that React will sort of put things into first before it actually outputs the browser DOM. And it's a very different way of building applications. So we'll dive into that component piece that I keep saying over and over. And essentially, it is designed for you to build user interface applications.
Okay, so Rami, let me just kind of clarify this here. I always say that the web stack is made up of these three legs, the structure, the style, and the script, the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. And the HTML is this framework for where components are on the page. You know what kind of components you're using, and then and I shouldn't use the word components because that's going to become very overloaded here soon. But I mean the elements of your UI, and then the style, which is the CSS, and then the script, which is kind of adds the logic to it. And so what you're saying is that with React, we're taking this structure, which is the DOM, the document object model, and we're saying there's a more efficient way to do this. We can, instead of actually having a DOM and interacting with it and taking on some pretty expensive operations, let's do this a bit differently. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So we're actually, instead of you manipulating the DOM like you would with jQuery or some of the other frameworks out there, instead you're going to manipulate these React components, and then React itself is going to manipulate the DOM for you, and it's going to do that in a very efficient way. So if you're building a very complex single-page application, we have multiple elements in your page that are changing and data that might be changing everywhere. Well, React will actually optimize a lot of that piece for you by using this virtual DOM, and you're able to change multiple pieces of your page without having to do like excessive DOM manipulation calls, which, as you said, are pretty expensive in most cases. And the other neat thing that that happens in React is that you actually write a lot of the HTML, the elements that you might be using to represent a component in the JavaScript, so in that script file instead, using the React component classes.
Okay.
Which is different.
So in other words, I may have used jQuery and said, go loop through this list of things and find the one that the user clicked on or the one that we're interested in, and change its class to selected, and then that style will apply to it and it'll look like it's selected. And that works differently in React, right?
Yeah, so instead of doing that, you would have that entire piece be encapsulated into one sort of object, one component, and then all that work that has to do with that component, all the state that you might be representing in the DOM with that component is actually all encapsulated in one place.
Okay, and then it notices that it does a differential, and it notices that this one's highlighted, and so it highlights it in the real
so
DOM.
you can add classes, you can tell it to track a certain state, and then if that state changes, you can sort of attach it to the class and the class name for that element in the DOM and a whole bunch of things like that.
Okay, well, let's answer the question, why should a person learn React right now?
React is becoming an increasingly popular tool, popular framework. It's less of a framework, more of a library, but if you look at the ecosystem that has sort of come around React, it's becoming very, very popular and very, very powerful is the word that I want to use. So React itself, if you look at it, it's a very small library in comparison to some of the other UI frameworks that you might have heard of. But what comes around React, like say the Webpack tools, like that includes things like hot module reload, so that you have this very, very rich developer experience when building with React. The React dev tools that are out there that fit inside your browser, the ability to sort of go back and forth between states in React is something that's really powerful. So it becomes really interesting when you pair up React with the stuff that's in the ecosystem, including libraries like Redux, which is a very powerful way for you to manage the state in your application. So if you look at it, I think React is a very, very powerful way of building applications. It's definitely something that will be supported a long time into the future. You have huge projects that are being built with React. To give you an example, WordPress.com recently rewrote their entire .com interface for WordPress with React, and they even released like a version of their web app that sits inside a desktop app, so that you can basically do the same thing that you're doing in the browser, but in a desktop app. It's the same UI, same app. Everything's pretty much the same. And so there's a lot of really powerful things, and it's really handy as a developer, especially a web dev that is trying to keep up to date with all these new technologies, to actually investigate and spend some time with React. Because it is definitely one of the most interesting developments in the past year and a half.
And I believe Facebook uses it too, right?
Of course, and Facebook is actually the company behind React, and you can't really talk about React without talking about Facebook. They've actually, if you look at the React dev tools and then you browse to facebook.com, you can actually, using the dev tools, sort of go into the components that are in the web page, which is pretty cool. So you can see it like live in action.
Because it's all client-side.
Yeah, it's all client-side. Everything's running in the browser, so it's all there, really. And so Facebook is where the React project got started. but it is an open source project. So if you want to contribute to it, all the code is up on GitHub. You can submit issues, you can submit pull requests, and it is used by bigger companies outside of Facebook as well.
Well, we're always looking to get into tools and learn tools and frameworks and things that, as developers that are going to go forward. You know, like that we want to build a skill set that's going to be increasingly relevant, increasingly employable, increasingly exciting and supported, and has a community behind it. And this is certainly one of those that has some real energy behind this whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
So do you want to show us what we're going to be working on today to teach all of these concepts of React?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have we built a sample app. It's open source on GitHub. You can check it out. You can see how we built everything. You can look at the different pieces. So if you actually take a look at the GitHub page, React MVA, every single module has a code folder that has sort of the end result of that module, as well as the starting point and some of the middle points. So for example, in module 3, there's like a part 1 that's sort of in between the start and the end code repo. So all the sample code is up on GitHub right now. So what we are building today is essentially a tool for a pizza chain to manage the bots that are taking orders for their pizza and seeing where those orders are going and to which restaurant that's going to help actually deliver that order. So if you think about it, bots are becoming this really interesting way for you to do commerce online. So instead of having to go to an app or go to like the pizza's website and then have to relearn how to order a pizza with all of these different apps, instead you would just send a chat message saying, "Hey, I want a small cheese pizza. My name is Rami. Deliver it to 123 Sesame Street."
Yeah.
Right. So it's a very different way of ordering things online, which is really cool, and it's becoming really popular. So what we're doing today is we've actually built a bot that lets you that takes in the pizza order that you want, sends that order over to our React single page application, so that the person who's sitting on the other end can see all the orders that have come in through the chat bots and can see where they're going and to which store they're going. So let me actually give you a little demo. Now, we're not designers, so it's not as beautiful as we would love it to be, but this is essentially what it looks like. You've got an inbox pane that shows all the conversations that are happening. You're going to be able to select, so if we load some sample data, you can select a conversation and see what the conversation was. So here I selected with Rami, like this conversation with Rami Sayar. I can see my bot said, "Hello, can I take your order?" I said, "Can I have a small meat lover's pizza? Where would you like it delivered? 123 Sesame Street, Montreal, Canada." And then on the side here, you can see we've got all the stores and ovens that are available. So Joe's Pizza on Bloor Avenue or Joe's Pizza on University Avenue, you can see like which one has confirmed orders, which one has orders that are in the oven, and which ones, how many delivered orders have taken place. So essentially, that's what we're going to be building. If I actually show you the chat interface, this is what it looks like. So this is a really cool interface that will show you how to include into your own projects. So I can just say hi, all right, and then this chat bot is going to go to my server on React MVA and ask me, hey, well, actually, it'll go to the server and figure out what the next step would be. In this case, it is to get my name and my order. So I can say, my name is Rami, and I want a small cheese pizza. And then we'll ask me, where would you like it delivered? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Sesame Street. It'll take my order. Now, if I go back here, just do a quick refresh. Apologies there. I want to go to the home page right here. So I can actually fetch the data and then see this is the conversation that I just put in right now. So where would you like it delivered? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Sesame Street. So this is the app that we're going to be building today.
Cool. Nice and simple, straightforward.
Yeah. It shows a lot of the different concepts. You can see that we had different components in there. Each, like the inbox component had like sub-components as well, like sort of little pieces inside that would go inside this bigger component. So that piece would be like the conversation row itself.
So it'd be like a component with a child component. But we have some master detail as well because you're clicking on one of those conversations and loading that in the side pane.
And it's opening up the details, that's right. You can see that we even have a routing set up here so that you can see like conversation/Rami is this one right here. and then this is essentially the app that we're going to be building today.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, that's perfect. It feels well scoped, like, it kind of touches on all of the concepts that we know are going to be necessary in any size app, but it's small enough to be able to pretty easily wrap your head around. Of course, everybody understands pizza. I think that's universal.
Yeah, I love pizza. I love me some good pizza.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this one up for now, and we will move into next talking not just about React, but in not just components in general, but specifically more like React components.
Exactly.
Awesome.
All right.
All right, welcome back. Now, when you're working with a React.js application, the first thing that you need to do is set up your development environment. We as developers, we love to have the right tools for the job, and we need to get our proverbial React toolbox out, set it on the workbench so that we're ready to go. So, Remy, can you tell us what this looks like with React.js? What kinds of tools do we need, and what does the environment look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So you need at least an editor, and ideally an editor that actually gives you some syntax highlighting. It shows you the different JavaScript errors that you might be writing. So we're actually going to be using VS Code, and that's a free tool that you can download from code.visualstudio.com. It gives you a lot of IntelliSense for React projects especially, and that's really handy. So if you're ever writing a component and you miswrite it, it'll actually sort of a squiggly line underneath it and tell you that this needs to be rewritten.
And let me just jump in right there. The thing I love about the IntelliSense in VS Code is it's not just like word completion where it's kind of guessing at what variables you've written so far. It's actually looking into the JavaScript objects and seeing what are the valid properties of those objects and using those for the IntelliSense.
Yeah, that's right. It's really, really powerful. The other thing that you'll need is, of course, Node.js. And there's a couple of reasons for this. A lot of the tools that we're going to be using to actually compile our React application are built with on top of Node.js. And you won't actually need Node.js to run the React app in the browser, but you will need it to at least get the app together. We're going to also need Webpack, which is this really powerful module loading tool. So I'm actually going to show you the website right here. This is Webpack, so you can get it at webpack.github.io. You're going to need to install this using npm, so you got to have Node.js installed first, and then install Webpack. And what this tool is going to do is it essentially takes all your JavaScript files, your CSS, your less files, your images, it runs it through the Webpack tool, and will produce basically a bundle of JavaScript code that will output the CSS and output even the images for you. And if you're wondering, okay, well, hold on. When I said npm install this, what does that mean? So npm is a tool that comes as part of Node.js. It stands for the Node Package Manager. So it's the tool that you're going to use to install packages for Node.js. So if you're coming from an environment that's sort of I guess different from how most web developers are building their web apps today, Node and npm are your go-to tools for installing all the packages that you might need for both the front end and the back end side of your web app. And it's a really powerful tool. The other thing that we're going to be using quite a bit today is Babel. And Babel, if you take a look at their website, they describe it as a JavaScript compiler. Use next generation JavaScript today. So what Babel does is it actually transpiles your JavaScript code that you might be writing and using some new features like classes or modules into JavaScript code that runs on older browsers that don't support those features yet. So you need to actually install Babel as well. And the reason for that is React uses a special syntax called JSX. So to be able to actually transpile that into JavaScript that executes in your browser, you're going to need to have Babel installed. And when we get to using ES6 modules and classes, you're going to need that transpiler again to convert that into older JavaScript that will run on older browsers like IE 9 or IE 10. So that pretty much sums up all the tools that we might need. There's actually just one more, and I'm hoping that you also have that installed and you might be familiar with it, and that is Git. So if you've never used Git, it's a source code management tool. So we've hosted our project up on GitHub. Now, if you've have never used Git, you can actually download a zip of the repository, so you don't need to use Git. But we highly recommend that you do to keep track of all your code changes and the commits that you're doing. And you'll see us actually referencing different Git commands throughout the different modules. But you don't need to have it installed. You can just download the zip file. But we highly recommend that you do a pull using the Git tools.
Yeah, and chances are, if you're in this space, there's a good chance you're already using Git as probably an integral part of your life. But this is good. This feels like I'm using some pretty standard frameworks and tools. I have some pretty standard dev dependencies for enabling my workflow here, right?
Yeah, and
this isn't anything out of the norm.
No, it isn't anything out of the norm. Node.js and Git are actually coming pre-installed now in a lot of different operating systems. They're just already available for you. So if the only thing that you might need to download manually might be just Visual Studio Code. So that's pretty much
visualstudio.com.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. The rest of it is all using npm install. So if you've got Node installed, then it's just a one-liner that will get the rest of the dependencies ready for you.
All right, and that's it for the requirements for your dev environment for working on a React.js application. Hey, welcome back to React.js. Now we're going to talk all about components in this second module of the course, an introduction to components. Now, this is a bit of an overloaded term, components, but we're going to try to define all of this for you. But Remy, why don't you start us off by letting us know what is the general definition of components, and specifically what are web components?
Yeah, so a component, you could think about it as a piece of your application. Different languages, different frameworks have sort of different specific definitions to what a component is in that framework. But really, what their main mission is to encapsulate something.
Okay.
Whether it's an object, a view, or something. But it's really meant to be like this encapsulated, independent piece that you can drag and drop around your app and in different places. Now, it'll depend on the language, the framework you're using. But that's the general idea of what is a component. Now, what are components in the web space? Well, that's also actually a very loaded term right now, because there's actually lots of movements towards building a standard around these things called web components. So let me actually show you what a component would look like in a user interface, just so you can get an idea. If you think about it, if we take a look at our inbox here, that is a component, right? Like, it's sort of independent right there. It's like an independent piece of the view. But what's more interesting is that this little piece on the inside could also be its own component. So you can have components inside other components. You can have more than one component at the root level on a page. And essentially, it is this piece, right? So if we look at it, this is a part of the DOM, really. It's an element. So essentially, when web components are being developed, that's sort of what we're trying to do. We're trying to create these new elements that are actually the web page can actually load and sort of just use right away. And that is what web components is. So if you actually check out webcomponents.org, it's a great place to discover and learn about the different tools and libraries that are out there for web components. And there's even polyfills that you can install that will let you use components in browsers that don't natively support them yet. And there's all the specifications for custom elements, the imports, the templates, and all of that stuff you can actually read more about it on this page. And there's a couple of popular libraries, among them Polymer, that's really well known when it comes to the web component movement. But if we go back to our React app, our sample application right here, a web component would be, in the future, would be this piece, this inbox piece. So you might have an inbox element that you would just drag in to your app, and it's sort of independent right there.
Okay, so what is the advantage of encapsulating our UI elements in components?
Right, so one of the main advantages is that you'll actually be able to reuse your components. So I don't know about you, but in the past, I used to write a lot of web applications that had multiple of the same pieces. Okay, so one time I was building a social network for my high school. I know I know there's a very popular one out there that's actually the one that built this library that we're demoing today, React. But I just wanted to run through the exercise, do something a little custom for my high school. I was really young and I just wanted to have some fun. So I did write a piece, and if you think about it, what are some of the things in the social network? You might have a post, okay? You might have a like, and that post might appear on multiple different types of pages, right? You could have a page for the team. You could have a page for a person, a student in the high school. So that component looked, that piece of the UI looked pretty much the same everywhere, right? So maybe there was a couple of things that would make it a little bit different on each page, but all of those you can sort of program to. You can sort of provide as an API to that component. So that's essentially what a component lets you do. It lets you encapsulate a piece that you could then reuse in multiple different pages. It might render a little bit differently in the browser just by maybe changing a parameter or so, but really it's something that's reusable, that you could sort of stack next to each other. And then if you had a very powerful component library like React, you can actually embed different components into each other and then sort of build this big tree of reusable components. And that's actually what we're doing in our sample app. We have a bunch of different components that sort of fit into each other, and they're all sort of encapsulated into the objects, including the state of that component and like what data is inside. It's all encapsulated into that object that you can even sort of move around.
And now, is it fair to say that it's an advantage not only in my application being able to reuse it in different places, but also an advantage in that I'm able to share it with other people? I mean, I found that there are React component sharing sites out there. In NPM, there's a keyword that you can add to your React component so that it's easily discoverable by everybody else. And so now if you make a like button, I can just grab that and use it, and it's all encapsulated, so it's ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. And there's even libraries that you could use that come with a bunch of different pre-built components. Most of them are very generic or general enough that you could use them in multiple different apps. So you could have a component for the search bar on the top of your web page, right? Like most pages have a search bar so that you can search through the page or the database or whatever. That could be a component that is shared widely and shared among different apps and different projects, different teams, just among the world in the world in general. As an open source project, you can definitely have a lot of these components being shared.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us now how this component architecture compares to a very popular architecture that we all know, which is MVC, the Model View Controller. Is this altogether different, or how's that positioned?
So if you think about what React does, it essentially focuses entirely on the view layer.
Okay.
Right? So if you look at your traditional MVC application, the model is where you might have your data. The controller is sort of what channels the data between the model and the view. All right. So the React piece is just the view piece, essentially. If you can actually use an MVC framework with React, that's not a problem.
Okay.
And then just send the data to the view.
Okay.
But essentially, it is just the view piece, right? Now, because React is built differently, you can use, and the way that it's built, you can actually embed it in a bigger MVC framework, like Angular, for example.
Okay.
Or you could do the React way of things, which is connect React with a state management library like Redux, and build your app that way. So if you think about it, how does it relate to an MVC structure? It's essentially that view piece.
Okay. And that is it for the general concept of components and web components. Next, let's take a look at React components and how those are the same and how they're different.
So we just talked about MVC frameworks and how that relates with React and views, and how the component piece is really just the view piece in an MVC framework. Now, we don't really need to work with MVC frameworks to be building a React application. Like, we don't need to actually do that. And in fact, our entire sample app is not really structured around an MVC framework. But now that we've covered that, let's actually dive deeper into the components piece. So what we're going to do right now is introduce the React components, which are a bit different than what you might expect components in other languages, or even the web components standard that's being developed.